Hello and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. Gavan Casey here, and I'm joined as always by my colleague with the 42, Murray Kinsella. Murray, you're standing up. Can we take it that you mean business this week?
I felt like get up out of the seat, try and take a bit of Bernard's passion, learn from his work-ons and his lessons over the last few months, and yeah, I'm ready to go.
Class. Bernard Jackman, thanks a million for joining us as always. How are you?
Yeah, thank you. I'm delighted that I'm developing leaders and sharing the responsibility. So I'm going to take a step back today and no rants from me.
Yeah, you mentioned that just before we started recording. It's an interesting approach, a kind of a more mellowed show we can expect today, and maybe a little bit of a reprieve from the general anger and depression for listeners as well. Although, let's see how we get on. It's easy to say at the start. We'll see how the conversation develops. We're going to chat today, obviously, about Ireland and Italy at the weekend. Might move that actually sort of to the second half of the show. There are a few things we need to chat about first. I think the most pressing issue as far as the Six Nations is concerned at the moment is the postponement for now of the France-Scotland game and the eventual rescheduling of it. There is no fixed date at the moment. There's some talk in French media as we record that the game could be pushed back as far as July, which would probably have really disastrous consequences for the competition as a whole, just in terms of it not being wrapped up potentially at the end of it or the scheduled end of it. And we're going to chat about as well a couple of big names returning for the provinces, which could have knock-on effects for Ireland as well, maybe for the back end of the tournament, or certainly towards the latter end of this year. France, Scotland to begin with, Murray, and I have to say I have an awful sympathy for the Scots. It seemed as though literally yesterday, Wednesday, everything was in order for them at least, and obviously France had 14 cases in their squad or in their sort of overall setup by that stage, so you would have pointed towards the advantage being in Scotland's hands. Effectively a 15th case on Thursday, and that was a tipping point, and the game is now postponed. And look, I suppose on the one hand you could have people arguing what difference does one more case make, but the counter argument is probably that there's a sense that the virus remains sort of active within that setup, and as much as it might just be one more case on paper, there's potentially a few more there that haven't quite registered for whatever reason, and for safety reasons and the usual reasons we now are without that game this weekend. The complications for Scotland are fairly clear. I think they made their case during the week for the game to be played this weekend on the basis that if it was to be rescheduled for a non-Six Nations weekend, it will interfere with their agreement with foreign clubs in relation to player releases, and that's probably why we're looking at potentially July now, although that's very tentative at the moment. But it is disastrous for Scotland more so than France, really, isn't it? Because they have that added complication, whereas for France, most of their players are playing domestically, and they have an element of control over the players that will become available, whereas Scotland now face several conversations with several clubs in order for some of their talismanic figures to actually be available for that rescheduled game whenever it is.
It's a disaster for both, really. It's, I suppose, in the end, no great surprise the match is going to be postponed. It's no great surprise that this has happened during the Six Nations at a time when COVID-19 is still rampant in so many countries. It would have been a miracle if we got through the championship without any great upheaval. But that's what we have now. I mean, that talk of July, obviously, if we end up in that scenario, you've got the really unsatisfying, and listen, there are more important things in life, but unsatisfying scenario of the Six Nations dragging all the way on to then and being decided on that final game. You won't get your Super Saturday finish, which obviously France and Scotland probably both have ambitions of being in the hunt for that title. And not only do Scotland have issues over the player release, potentially if the game was to be played in that rest weekend, but France obviously have to get rid of COVID in their environment as well. They've got to have people isolating. How quickly will they get back to training? So there's loads of questions there, and certainly the initial feeling seems to be that rest weekend won't be used. So it is going to be really tricky to find a date for it. You'd look maybe even the weekend after the Six Nations. There's supposed to be a Pro 14 final. Probably won't have a Scottish side in that, but you will have guys back to English Premiership clubs. You have the top 14 going again. So it gets really messy because you have European weekends on the other side of that. So absolutely the Six Nations would have hoped to avoid this situation, and it's a shame, as you say, for the Scots. It's a shame for the French, who've got some lovely momentum, had won their two games, had a really good spirit in their camp, and we were all enjoying really watching them play. So definitely frustrating, but this was probably always going to be a reality of this Six Nations, and now it's about making the best of it. Nothing is going to be ideal from here, but you've got to try and do your best to save the competition and make sure that that integrity that we speak about is included. I think that's why they didn't go straight for a 28-0 win. They want it to be, as much as possible, a championship that's won out on the pitch. So fingers crossed that can happen in a realistic time frame.
Yeah, I guess the frustration, Bernard, from a Scottish point of view on the face of it is just that it's not their issue, and they're probably suffering as a result of something that was well beyond their control, which is not necessarily to put the blame at France's feet, because we understand at this point a year in how transmissible this virus is, and it's crept into plenty of environments in which all of the necessary precautions were adhered to. And yet there are a few reports in France that I was reading this morning and yesterday where they're actually kind of blaming Fabien Galtier a little bit, like at least suggestions in L'Equipe that have been sort of regurgitated or repackaged elsewhere by other outlets, that it was he who was patient zero, if you like, and that he allegedly broke the bubble, something which he disagrees with and is on record as doing so. I found that interesting, though. I don't know if you've been speaking to people in France over the course of the last couple of days, but even the fact that like a guy who is doing a fantastic job over there is almost being blamed, or there are suggestions of blame actually towards him as one individual, rather than this being just circumstantially unfortunate, if you like.
Yeah, I think that's strange. He would have a few enemies in the media. Fabien, he can be quite opinionated and has certainly rubbed some up the wrong way. But I think it's more a case of he obviously was the first to fail the test, and then obviously it's become a cluster, and people are putting two and two together. But I think the reality is moving a small army like that, you know, from across the country to play a game, and you know, the amount of interactions they get, even when they're in the bubble, there's still people who serve the food in Marcoussis. There's still the flight over and the flight attendants. Like, it's just so hard to pin it down where it's come from. So I think that's pretty harsh to be blaming Fabien. And if he says he didn't break the bubble, I presume he didn't, you know, and I haven't seen any evidence to say that show that he did. So I just think it's looking to put blame on somebody, and you know, it just shows you that once it gets into a squad, it's very difficult to contain it. And even though we only had one failed test today, which some people would say, oh, well, sure, why don't they just find another player to replace that player? The reality is there's probably a lot of close contacts within the squad. And I suppose from a Scottish point of view, they would want to have a probably more sustained, clean bill of health across the squad to even play them as well. So it's kind of what happened with Toulon when they went to Scarlets, and they didn't feel that the Scarlets could have, been 100% sure that they were all clear and the players didn't want to play. So it's a difficult one. I think they'll do everything in their power to get it played before the last round, Super Saturday, and they'll even look at potentially awarding the game to Scotland rather than let it drag into June. I think, you know, from a Six Nations point of view, they'd rather have the last round, you know, dictating who wins it. And ironically, France could still be in the hunt going into the last round, even with a forfeited match. So I look at it's far from ideal, but you know, we all know that the whole competition and pro sport is on a thin line every week, and unfortunately, you know, this is it's one of the games to miss out.
Can you talk to us about that issue that Scotland face now in relation to their player release agreement with some of those foreign clubs? Like, how troubling actually is it in practicality or in reality, if you like, when it comes to having to negotiate essentially for these player releases? Like, obviously there's going to be pushback from clubs. Murray talks about the fact that there's a European weekend the week after the Pro 14 final in which there wouldn't be Scots involved necessarily, and like so you can kind of argue, okay, well, the clubs are definitely going to need the Scottish players for that weekend. But then on the flip side of that, you probably have a couple of those English clubs who will be looking more so towards Premiership even the week before that, rather than European. Like, some clubs might feel as though they can afford to lose the Scottish player on a European weekend, whereas others will feel they can't. So it's complicated in that front. But like, is there a realistic proposition in which clubs actually just refuse to release players on a sort of a mass basis, how much does sort of player power come into it as well? Because I'd imagine a lot of those players would actually want to play for Scotland even in a decisive Six Nations game.
Player power will have no influence. Each individual club will have no say. It'll be the collective. So the governing body of the Premiership clubs, obviously Racing is a little bit different with Finn Russell, but the Premiership clubs in general have been inflexible in these situations, and they basically say, look, we're all in this together, and if we start to give in certain scenarios, now maybe COVID, is enough of a reason to actually be a bit more flexible. But in general, it's been the governing body, all the clubs as a whole have kind of stuck to their guns and made sure players came back. Toby Faletau played for Bath last week, for example, and they insist that players play in test or come back to the club in test week. And obviously, if they're not injured, they don't play. And I think that's going to be the issue. I think Scotland, the Premiership clubs, will be very slow to release the Scottish players, and it's less of an issue for the top 14 clubs because it's only really maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's just Finn coming from Scotland or from France, but it's generally not the clubs on an individual basis who have the say.
Do you imagine or envisage, Murray, that these exceptional circumstances could see a sort of a loosening of that adherence to a kind of a collective approach on behalf of the Premiership clubs, or do you think they would remain steadfast in kind of refusing to release Scottish players for a game of this magnitude potentially?
You can kind of understand if they do, if they are a bit stubborn with it. They've probably given already in terms of calendar and moving things around, and everyone probably has their limit in that sense. At the same time, you'd love to think that Test Rugby is still viewed as the pinnacle of the game, and that potentially even World Rugby or Six Nations should have foreseen something like this happening and made a move in advance to, say, shift that Reg 9 window as they did back for the autumn. You remember they changed that window so that players would be available. It doesn't seem like that's happened unless it's happened very much behind the scenes. So I can kind of understand clubs insisting. They've got a season to complete as well, and they've got their windows that they want their strongest teams available for, the guys they pay in some of those instances a lot of money to. So I can understand if they stay steadfast with it, but like, it would just be brilliant if we get this Six Nations finished in the time frame it's supposed to be, because otherwise you have the same situation as you did last year where everything's kind of building up and you're running out of windows and it just gets messy all over again.
Certainly does. Better news on the Irish front. We've got some big name returns, Murray. I'll stick with yourself. Joey Carbery back in Munster's Matchday 23 for Friday night's fixture with the Cardiff Blues. You've got Robert Ballacuna and Jacob Stockdale back in action for Ulster as well, which is a significant boost to them. Start with Carbery. Like it kind of is, I think, a bit of a boon for Munster's prospects for the rest of this season, but obviously there are implications there for Ireland as well, as there are, of course, for Stockdale and potentially Ballacuna. But just given that 10 and 15, if you like, in terms of how Ireland play, are sort of hot button positions at the moment, I'd imagine there's a kind of I don't know, like a unanimous sense of relief that Carbery is back, albeit we probably have to temper expectations as well. He's played one game in basically 2 years, so great to see him back, and yet patience required here, I think, before we can start kind of celebrating wildly.
Yeah, well, everything so far indicates that there is going to be that patience, that caution, that understanding that he'll take a while to get back up to speed, because maybe last time things were a little bit hurried and there was the pressure of the World Cup from himself as well, from Joey Carbery wanting to go and play in that as well. So really this problem has dated back to August 2019, as you say. It is fantastic news for everyone in Irish rugby, just first of all on a personal level, to see a guy who's had such horrible injury struggles repeatedly, and not just this time. He's had hamstring stuff before, he's had that broken arm, he's been really unlucky and hasn't really had a chance to completely fulfill the potential that everyone sees him as having. He's 25 now, so he's still a young man, but I think it's really exciting for Munster and Irish rugby to have a guy back with his particular skill set. I actually think since he's been injured, his strengths have become even more important, particularly at the top level of rugby. His creativity, his footwork, ability to beat defenders, his attacking, kicking skills in particular, something that we've talked about a lot, are really relevant to how the best teams operate now. A guy who can we've talked about decision making with Ireland. He can make good decisions consistently. He can see space. He can identify it. He can communicate really well, and he's calm on the ball. So it's massively exciting to get that skill set back into the Munster team first and foremost. And they've got their, I suppose, quarterback figure back. A guy who, as we say, at 25, feels probably this is the next chapter for me now. I'm going to step up here, be a leader, make up for lost time. And then with Ireland as well, he's pretty much the figure we've talked about them missing in terms of a second playmaker, as well as also someone to push Johnny Sexton. Obviously, we're going to be patient with his return, but certainly he's the one that the RFU viewed as the next in line behind Sexton, and that's the way it was before he was injured. He was there pushing and getting minutes off the bench and contributing really well in that Grand Slam, even starting a test down in Australia that summer of 2018, much to Johnny Sexton's dissatisfaction at the time. So it's positive in so many different aspects, but first and foremost, yeah, get him back on the pitch. Don't expect too much too soon, but at the same time, I think it's right to be excited for him on a personal level and also just for Irish rugby.
Murray has alluded to the potential for Carbery to play at 15 for Ireland in the past, Bernard, and you could probably make that argument for Munster as well, given that they have a conveyor belt of talent coming up at 10, albeit much of that talent is untested at the moment, but there are options there. Just want to get your own take on that. Like, do you see a future for Carbery at 15 for Ireland, or do you still very much see him as a 10 and that potential successor to Sexton?
Look, I think to be honest, probably at the moment the need is more prevalent for him to be the backup to Johnny or to replace Johnny eventually. Just because the fact that we haven't been able to find another 10, who's proven himself to be the ability of Joey in while Joey's been out. So, can he play 15? Yeah, he definitely can. I know Leinster thought he was better suited to 15 than 10. If he plays 15, do you get an extra playmaker in the team? Whereas if you play him at 10 with Hugo Keenan, and the centres that we're playing at the moment, you still have the same issue. You're still playing with one playmaker. So that's a concern. But I just think, look, let's let him get some game time over the next month. Let him find his feet and not put pressure on him. But it's a real positive to see him come back. And I think to be honest, if he hits where he was at, he'll be the next best 10. And then it's a case of whether Mike Catt wants to play with two playmakers and puts him in at 15 with Sexton. But I'm just looking forward to seeing him play and find his confidence again, and hopefully get a bit of luck over the rest of the season.
Murray, let me ask you to add your thoughts to that opinion that you've had in the past and what Bernard has said there. Like, it does feel, you and Owen Toolan on the Members podcast, for example, over the course of the last probably 2 international windows or cycles, have mentioned ad hominem the lack of second playmaker for Ireland and how it could be a transformative kind of introduction to the team and what they're trying to do as well. Like, we're talking about Mike Catt, and look, it's not really clicking at the moment. We can chat later maybe about the fact that the coaching staff feel as though that's sort of based on sort of player responsibility or a failure to execute on that front. But strategically, it isn't really working, at least from what we've seen so far over the past 12 months. Hugo Keenan has been a revelation at 15 for Leinster and for Ireland more recently. And yet, like, you think of that James Lowe chance in the corner against France, maybe Keenan delays slightly in the pass, and it's probably not the most natural aspect to his game. We've had similar sort of concerns, if you like, over Jordan Larmour when he's played 15 for Ireland, and we haven't really had a kind of a playmaking 15 outside of Will Addison really in the last sort of 2 or so years. Like, does Carbery playing at 15, and I'm talking, when he's found his feet properly in 6 months' time or whatever, add a string to Ireland's bow that they actually can't do without at the moment? Or is it the case actually that they also can't do without a 10 to replace Sexton in the sort of short to medium term?
Yeah, and absolutely, that's the big question for Andy Farrell and co. I think Munster they signed him as a 10, and they'll want him to lead the side from that position, I think, while also understanding that there are 2-3 really talented young out halves coming through in Crowley and Healy and Flannery. guys who probably aren't quite ready to be starting those big matches yet. They haven't really got the exposure to them yet. Certainly with Crowley and Flannery, they haven't really got any exposure at all. Healy obviously has been racking up starts in the Pro 14 and a little bit in the Champions Cup. So you would hope they continue their progress, and that opens up the pitch for them. I suppose from my point of view, I think it's a good model, the 10-15 or the 10-12, the dual playmaker role, because it means that one guy is not just the main man. I don't think that, the 10's got to call plays. He's in a really central hub of the team, and you want to have a clear tactical leader. But I think the issue with Ireland is that that's been too prominent, that Johnny Sexton has been too much of the leader. He's been handed so much responsibility. We've talked about in the past how opposition teams have just felt we get to him and we stop their attack. I mean, George Ford spoke about that last year. They felt that everything just goes through Johnny Sexton and they could shut that down. There's also Johnny Sexton and his future tied up in this as well. He's going to sign another 1-year contract with the RFU. Beyond that, we don't know, and he's probably having doubts about how long it goes on beyond that as well. So whether you move early to put Joey in at 10 or you play him with Sexton in the same team, I could see that happening in the shorter term. But then is that a detriment to him playing at 10 long term? So it is a really interesting one to weigh up. But for me, getting his skill set back into both teams is the most important factor. He's brilliant at things like scanning, seeing where that space is and communicating that to others, as well as directing it from 10 and responding to others, giving him those cues as well. So that's the most important thing to get him back in there. But I can't see him playing at 15, to be honest, especially as he eases his way back into things now, and potentially that removes him some of that traffic and some of that contact element of it as well. And certainly he's got the skill set. As Birch mentioned, Stuart Lancaster felt that was his position, albeit Johnny Sexton was there as the 10. So that kind of stymied him there. And the RFU and Farrell will just be thrilled. I know Andy Farrell's been really frustrated that he hasn't had him there. He's probably cursed the bad luck in that sense of not having him as that option to push Sexton as well.
Jacob Stockdale and Robert Balakoon back for Ulster. Massive boost for Dan McFarlane and co. Bernard. We've probably spoken enough about Stockdale on the pod, and as much as it is a great boost to have him back, looking at sort of like wider implications and I guess bigger picture, Balakoon has been earmarked as a potential international. Like, do you see him actually being added to that mix sooner rather than later? Do you see him becoming not only an international, but actually a guy who Ireland call upon sort of regularly and is in that conversation alongside the Stockdales and James Lowes at the moment? Yeah,
absolutely. I think he's a phenomenal talent and very, very exciting. It's a case of just him seeing how he bounces back from this injury, but he has phenomenal space, and I think his development in a short period of time has been really impressive in terms of he's obviously very coachable, his ability to make good reads, to fit into the Jared Payne defensive system, perfectly, and he looked to be really flying with confidence, until his injury. So definitely he's somebody who can come into the team, and sheer out and out pace is still an unbelievable weapon in international rugby. And look at Johnny May, look at Lewis Rees-Sammet. It's something we probably don't have a huge amount of, and particularly in our backline. I don't think our backline have a huge amount of pace. Larmer's more of a stepper. Keenan is busy, really busy type player, but probably lacking a half a yard of pace to be a real worry and stress to defences. And Lowe certainly isn't absolutely rapid, and that's not knocking any of them. It's just that's not really where their super strengths are. So I think Balakoon is a different type of profile, and I'm sure Dan McFarlane's like to have him back, but also I would imagine Farrell will be keeping a close eye on him.
Let's chat about Ireland then and the team to play Italy. You touched upon it a minute ago, Murray, that Johnny Sexton kind of, I'd say half jokingly or sort of like flippantly said he doesn't know if he'll be here for the World Cup in a couple of years' time during the week. And as you mentioned, what is factual is that he's probably going to sign a 1-year deal for the moment. And maybe there is an element of doubt then that sets in when you're being offered a 1-year deal. Bernard, to ask you, as somebody who knows him quite well, like, firstly, do you think he considered as a realistic proposition or a prospect that he won't be around for the next World Cup? Is he kind of in a mindset where he's taking it 1 year at a time at this stage? Because it would feel like a bit of a departure maybe from the way he has been seen to be thinking about it for the last couple of years.
Yeah, look, I don't know what he's thinking, but I wonder, is it a little bit like what Munster did with Carbery and just said, look, he's out. He's out. Stop asking about him. We're not putting any timeline on it. And when he's back, and just take that pressure away from him. And likewise with Sexton, is the whole narrative around, and people saying, oh, look, why are we investing in this guy? He want, until the World Cup, etc. Is that something? He's had a few knocks and injuries and things like that. And maybe he's just going back to probably where he was at 2 or 3 years ago, where he was just had short-term goals and, looking to play the next game, looking to play 3 of the next 4. And he knows that, look, if he's in great form in 12 months' time, the contract will look after itself and he can make a decision then. So probably being overly honest in terms of his ambition to go to a World Cup became a bit of a stick to beat him with, to a certain extent, and created more chat in society around everyone saying, well, look, can he get to the World Cup, etc. Whereas the reality is no one, even a Hugo Keenan or a Craig Casey might make the World Cup because it could be injured, and so it's hard to actually really plan that far in advance. So I think he's just taking the pressure off, sign a 1-year contract, try and get back a little bit of breaks in terms of injuries, and in a year's time, if he still feels good, then obviously he can sign on again. But I just think that potentially he's trying to focus on the here and now rather than plan too far in the future.
Starts for Ireland in the very immediate future this weekend. Murray, did the team resemble roughly what you expected? Obviously there are changes in the front row. You've got Tadhg at 6 and a couple of interesting calls, but overall a strong team. Any changes to what you had pictured in your mind in advance of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's along similar lines to kind of what we spoke about last week. I was trying to think. I think the pack is maybe exactly what we had thought it might be. And I suppose once he named the wider squad with no changes, you knew that it was going to be, I suppose, a very strong team. But it's still an exciting team. There's still 7 changes to it. There's a couple of debuts, almost certainly off the bench this time. You would imagine that Craig Casey will get on. And definitely Ryan Baird has a whole lot to add with his athleticism. I can't wait to see him in Test Rugby, and that's really exciting. Ronan Kelleher at 23 getting his first Six Nations start. I know he started last autumn, but that's also exciting. A guy who showed well off the bench the last couple of weeks. There could have been more change certainly in the back line. Johnny Sexton, as we've discussed, is his captain. He wants him raring to go for the Scotland and the England games because Andy Farrell is very much focused on winning those two. So I guess given where they are, which we've discussed is not ideal at all, there is an element of change there. There is an element of freshness, I suppose. I'm excited to see Tadhg at 6. Again, we discussed his attributes suiting that role with his jackling, his mobility, his handling, also his line-out defence, and obviously a great option in attack in that area as well. That's really exciting to have in your back row. Will Connors had a good impact against the French late on and nearly changed the momentum of the game at exactly the right time for Ireland. So he's rewarded with his. And then Larmour, who Birch mentioned earlier on, that footwork is just thrilling. Obviously, he's got aerial challenges at the moment and has to improve those skills. But he's a Grand Slam winner as well. He played a role in 2018 and he's a guy with a very determined mindset. So you would imagine he's been working hard on that stuff in the background. So there's a balance there, I think, between getting his key guys. I think Conor Murray would have played if he was fit, but getting the kind of momentum rolling again before 2 huge games, as well as just trying a couple of little different things across the team. So I'm excited to see this team play. It's really strong, and you would imagine they'll win well in Italy, and hopefully they can remedy some of those issues, or start to remedy some of those issues that we've talked about in terms of their attack especially. This is not going to be a good barometer of whether they've actually done that. I think Scotland and England games will tell us more, but that's not to diminish it completely. It's still a test match and they've still got to get to show on the road again.
Your thoughts on the team, Bernard, first of all, in an overall sense?
Yeah, look, it's probably as we predicted. I've no issue with Kilcoyne starting. I think Kelleher could easily become number 1 hooker for Ireland. Tadhg Furlong was always going to start, so it's strong. I feel a little bit sorry for Rhys Ruddock, who had a good game, and obviously he loses out to a non-specialist 6. I think probably lacking a little bit of pace maybe in the back row, but that won't be an issue this week. I think Conan's coming back into good form, obviously from injury, so Yeah, I would have started Conan, to be honest. I think that would have been giving him a chance to start, and he's a more productive ball carrier at the moment in terms of impact. I know CJ makes a huge amount of carries, but in terms of getting gain line, go forward, he is a little he's stronger in that area than CJ. CJ's work rate is phenomenal, but and then I'm happy to see Baird on the bench, Craig Casey on the bench. I probably would have left CJ out completely and gone with Coombs on the bench, just to have a look at him, reward him. I think he's someone that we need to look to bring through. And I texted Murray earlier to see how many players Andy Farrell has capped. So he's capped 11, which is credible. He'll have 13 capped on at the end of the day on Saturday, you'd imagine. And I suppose the challenge is to find 2 or 3 of those 13 who become starters, and that's the reality of it. You look at Wales and Lewis Rees-Zammit looks like he's going to be a star and could go and have, a significant influence for Wales over the next 40, 50 caps, to get 40, 50 caps. And that's what you want. There's no point in really having loads of depth. You just need 3 or 4, guys like Sexton, Murray, Rory Best, etc., who can have 10 or 12 years in the team and be part of success. So he has given people opportunities. The challenge now is to get another Caelan Doris, who we know is of that level, and I don't think that's he hasn't had a great amount of luck with that, to be honest. He's found some depth, but I don't think he's found match winners. And Kelleher could be someone who has a huge influence. I just think that the way the game has gone, I think the line out will be easier for him now with obviously a system that looks to be a lot fluider, finding space. He'll get confidence from that, and the rest of his game is very strong. So, yeah, I think it's a as expected team. And given we lost the first 2, he needed to go strong in terms of combinations. Obviously, a full Leinster backline, which is very unusual. 10 Leinster players in the starting 15. So, in terms of cohesion, they should be on the same page.
Yeah, just to reiterate that about Kelleher and Baird are probably the 2 guys that Andy Farrell feels can be those figures you're talking about, Bernard. I'd say that they maybe even would have anticipated that Kelleher would claim that starting spot even a little bit sooner. But as you mentioned, a couple of line-out issues that weren't all on him were probably damaging. Like, he is a remarkable athletic specimen. Even when he came off the bench the last couple of days, you saw it, making double tackles, running over Alan Wynne-Jones at one stage was just eye-opening in terms of what he can do. And the same for Baird. I really am excited about what he can do. He's freakishly powerful. He's obviously tall, he's strong, he's really intelligent, already has called lineouts in Leinster and things like that. And he's a potential game changer. Obviously, you've got your established now second row pairing of Henderson and Ryan, who have loads of growth left in them, but Baird can absolutely play a role either as a game changer off the bench. He's played 6 as well, so I'd say they're really excited about getting him into that mix. Also, a good stat, you mentioned the Leinster backline there. The unbelievably impressive Stuart Farmer says there's actually been an all-Leinster backline in Test Rugby twice before, but not since 1912 and 1931. I don't know how he's tracked that, to be fair to the guy, but that's really impressive stat sheet.
That is outrageous. Looking at this game, like in sort of the terms that you described it earlier, Murray, so it's a game that Andy Farrell absolutely can't take for granted at this stage, as we've established previously, and as everybody knows. But it's also a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of game, because if Ireland's attack clicks to an extent and just looks aesthetically better than it has in recent weeks and months, people say, well, it was only Italy, and yet if it doesn't, then there are even bigger issues, and the criticism is magnified and accentuated in the aftermath. Like, the only game that you could say, just in terms of the level of opposition that it's comparable to, I think, is Georgia in the autumn, where first half there actually were glimpses of Ireland's attack sort of functioning fairly fluidly, to say limited returns, but returns nonetheless, and then that dropped off a cliff in the second half. And we've discussed the game in the past, but it's, I guess, a danger here as well, is that, like, if you have a repeat performance, even if there are sort of glimmers of it coming together nicely, and then it doesn't really materialize in the second half, then you're at risk really of a sense of having hit an absolute brick wall in what they're trying to do. not only in terms of the knock-on effect on confidence for those last two games that Farrell wants to win, but in terms of, I guess, the perception of it, like, this needs to go well and it needs to look good, or else there will be a real feeling that Ireland are in trouble.
I agree with you. I don't think there's been as pressured an Italy game for a long time. They've lost the first two matches of the championship. They've absolutely got to win this and get that momentum we spoke about back, both within camp and without it as well. I agree with you. It would just be a really negative spiral to be on, and it would be hard for players to ignore that if everyone's getting stuck into them after they struggle past Italy, or I won't even mention it. It hasn't happened since 2013, but yeah, it's really vital for this coaching staff and what they're trying to implement. And this is a game absolutely where we should see more of that stamp, and you would hope is the case. You think back to last autumn when they hammered Italy at home, but even in that, yes, Italy were poor and they reacted poorly. I thought it was encouraging that there were a couple of turnover tries in that game, something that's obviously not been a strength in the bigger games, and certainly not last time against France when, as we spoke about, they missed a couple of opportunities or didn't look prepared for turnovers. You think about that game where Caelan Doris wins the ball under their posts and everyone clicks into a counter-attack mindset, and Conor Murray rolls that lovely grubber kick for Hugo Keenan to score. There was obviously the other one with Peter O'Mahony's beautiful one-handed pass to Bundy Aki to score. Those were encouraging signs, albeit against a weak opposition who reacts poorly. You would like to see those things, and I know everyone will say, you should have hammered Italy anyway, but I still think you can take little bits and pieces out of it. You want to see a better variety in their kicking game, more success with that, and not just contestables, finding grass. They should be able to do that against Italy. More variety in their playmaking, not just off 10 as we spoke about, but off 9. Gibson Park with his creative skills. The midfielders really putting their hands up and being communicative in that aspect to take those chances on the edge when they arise. Being better with the opportunities to offload. I mean, even kick return is a chance. We saw it once against France where CJ Sander actually offloaded Hugo Keenan. Every other time against those strong teams, he's just run into contact. There's opportunities there. The mindset around those turnovers I mentioned, and set piece strikes, they should work better in this game, because Italy, as we saw in the last couple of games, they do have slips even on first phase defence from lineouts. This is a chance for Ireland to show us and very much themselves that those things they've been working on can actually spark a bit of improvement. So there's all aspects of that. Even their own first phase defence, Ireland, as we mentioned and Bernard brilliantly analysed, they had slips in that regard against the French that really should be unacceptable to them, conceding in line breaks and tries off those kind of platforms. So there's massive areas for them to target for improvement, and certainly they within the camp won't be diminishing it if they do go out and put in a strong performance and get a bit of belief in what they're doing. It's badly needed, definitely. And I think it'll ease a little bit of the pressure on the coaching staff as well.
The coaching staff seem keen to put the pressure on the players at the moment, Bernard, and I don't really mean that in an untoward way. They're just placing the responsibility on the players to carry out the plans that they have made off the field, if you like, and to actually execute what they're practicing on the training pitch. And it's probably the right game to do so, in that there's every chance it will come together, you'd hope, against Italy, and that there will be opportunities there. I suppose on the flip side of it, usually when a coach does this in any sport, it can go one of two ways, because if it feels like there's an abdication on behalf of the coaches and there's too much responsibility on players can get a little bit fed up with that. Like fans of football, for example, would have seen exactly this happen with Frank Lampard recently, who was removed eventually as Chelsea manager. That being said, like, there does seem to be a real collective buy-in on behalf of this Ireland squad into what Farrell, Mike Cadda and co are trying to do. So again, they probably feel as though they can kind of afford to place this pressure on the players. But I just wonder what you make of those comments in a general sense, like as somebody who has coached, and I wonder if you've sort of implemented this yourself in the past, like I guess throwing down the gauntlet to players, like, it's on you now, you go out and do it, or else you're the problem. And there are probably a couple of follow-up questions to that as well.
Yeah, it's very I was really shocked by it, to be honest. I didn't see it coming, and a lot of coaches across all sports will always say to players, look, at the only thing I'll question you about is your attitude, your intent, and your work rate. If you fail in a skill element of it or an understanding of a strategy, that's back on the coaches. It's our job to actually make sure you have the skill set and the understanding of what you're trying to do to be able to perform it. But if you're slow getting off the ground, if you don't work hard enough on a kick chase or whatever, that's fair game. So I just thought it was strange. I thought the the Irish squad were there was a bit of structure to how to handle the media over the previous last 2 weeks, in that, there's obviously been question marks around our player development pathway. They roll out Peter Smith and he explains, how we develop players. And then, they roll out Gary Keegan, who's going to fix the mines and his obviously impressive record. And you're like, okay, well, look, there's a thought process here. There's a strategy to use these 2 weeks to kind of convince us that we're on the right track. And then I was really surprised that my cat questioned that. And without a doubt, we picked out clips against Wales where, they could have and should have thrown the pass to get you to the edge, and then that's where you can offload and stuff. So there has been opportunities missed, but the reality is it has to go back to you select those players, so you're saying they're the best in the country. You can pick anyone in Ireland, so it's not even heard of the squad as such. Have they the understanding and the confidence and the skill set to implement it? So I think it's a shared responsibility for sure, and it's an unusual one. Think of Eddie Jones. England get outplayed by Scotland, and he could. A lot of English players played really badly. A lot of their best players, Vunipola, Farrell, etc., particularly the Saracens players, but in general they looked really poor. And he could have easily said, look, we're undercooked, Saracens haven't played for a while, blah, blah, blah. But what did he say? He said, it's on me. It's on me. I didn't prepare the team well. So it's a very, it's a completely different attitude. And look, it's a stock standard response when they don't fire. But, it does show that he's taking responsibility for it. And what he does in private afterwards is up to him, but it was just a strange one, really. And I wonder, look, there's no doubt the players are playing for the coaches and all that stuff and playing for the jersey. And maybe he feels, I don't know what he feels he would get out of it, because I don't see them being able to work much harder. Maybe he's just frustrated, telling them, they need to have confidence to throw the pass, because that's effectively what's causing us the problems, is that we're getting stuck playing between the 15s. And I've heard some stuff this week around offloading and Ireland need to offload more. Yeah, but you have to understand when you can offload. You know what I mean? So I would say the two things Ireland need to improve to get our offload stats up is to have smarter set-piece launches, okay, where we get gain lines, where we run at space within the first three phases, like Jalibert did off a second phase for the French first try. That's a start. And then the second part of it is being able to attack the defence where they're weaker, which against Italy would be in the outside channels. They're actually okay. They're actually not bad around the ruck, and they're quite narrow in defence. So that's basically what we need to be able to do from an attacking point of view. Those two things should open up more opportunities to offload. But people expecting us just to be offloading without understanding that we're getting stuck playing into where the defence is strong. I mean, it's nonsense. Like, it doesn't matter how much the player wants to offload. I mean, if you're running into two bodies and you've got no time or space and you're not getting your nose through contact, it's not an offload, it's a pass pre-contact. And so that's what the Irish coaches need to do, is to be able to identify where the space is going to be against Italy and make sure we have the confidence and structure or the right players on the ball to get to that space. And then the whole dynamic of attack changes.
And just on the offloading thing, like, I think of that example in the France match where James Lowe kind of feels a high ball down the the left hand side of Ireland's pitch near halfway. He kind of gets past Penno and Fiku's the only one in front of him, and he kicks the ball away even though he has support around him. Like, a prime opportunity that, for me, naturally James Lowe takes to offload the ball. But that's the issue. I suppose the players aren't really seeing that stuff, and it applies to getting the ball into the wide channels. It applies to all those opportunities we talked about, like Billy Burns not passing and kicking the Gary Owen in the first minute, when I think the best version of Billy Burns definitely sees that space or scans that space. I think the best version of Gary Ringrose looks up and has an awareness of, actually, this is on, I'm going to scream for this ball, demand it. And like, coaching is getting the best out of players, helping them fulfill their potential, whichever way that may be. And at the moment, maybe that's not really happening. And it was interesting. Like Mike Catt in that press conference, his first two answers finished with the players have to do that better, make better decisions. And then we asked him, what are you doing to help facilitate that? And his answer wasn't really that clear. He said, we're trying to help them see the pictures and then they can make a better decision. So clearly there's a bit of a block there. And yeah, it's not just on the players. It's about coaches helping them to like work on that scanning, work on that ability to, when you get a turnover, make sure that the decision is right and not just what you agreed, what you might do off your first line out near the halfway line. So that probably relates back to the confidence thing you're talking about as well, Gavin, in terms of them having the belief in what they're doing and this weekend being important for it.
Just on that, I think like they're not seeing different pictures than on a week-to-week basis. Okay, there's maybe more pressure, but like in fairness to Munster, they have a positive attitude to attack at the moment. Connacht under Nigel Carr and Andy Farrell have a positive attitude to attack. Stewart, okay, so maybe not the freestyle offloading game that Leinster were in the early part of last decade, but they still have a very good attitude to attack. And when it's on to go from deep, they'll go from deep, and when it's on to offload, they'll offload. Ulster under Dwayne Peel as well. So and Larkham, so they all have environments where they're not kicking the leather off the ball. It's not 10-man rugby. So you can't really blame the structure. And I think Irish players are skilled. The skill set's there. It's just for whatever reason at the moment, and maybe it's time, and maybe it's just one good blowout, one big performance, and they get confidence and self-belief, and we're away. But at the moment, as I said, it's hard to see. It's hard. We can't say it with any evidence that it's just ready to click. We're just hoping it will.
And I don't want to be too fixated on the comments of coaches in press conferences, because like if we're to call a spade, a lot of what people say publicly in all walks of life really is bollocksology, and particularly when you're probably media averse and just want to get out of there again in half an hour. But I do feel as though they, in what Kat said, for example, that you touched upon there, Murray, when you are placing the responsibility almost solely on the players, or you're at least for this upcoming game saying this is on you, you need to go out and execute what we're working on with you. If frequently the players are incapable of doing that, and if you're selecting roughly those same players every game, the natural follow-up question to it from fans, media, and probably actually from guys outside of the squad and maybe even within the squad is, well, why do you keep picking those players? Like, if the responsibility is on the players and they continuously fail to take that responsibility, if you like, then why do you keep picking the same guys to make the same mistakes game on game on game?
Yeah, and absolutely there's responsibility on players, and this is more autonomy is probably what the players wanted. Certainly that was the feedback kind of post Joe Schmidt, that they wanted a bit more freedom and scope to make the decisions on the pitch. So sometimes you have to be careful what you wish for, and definitely guys are learning in that regard. Gary Ringrose is a great example. He put his hand up this week and said, absolutely, I got a few decisions wrong. I think we can probably all think of the examples where maybe he didn't pass, or maybe he ran laterally across the pitch, and definitely this is part of his learning process as a player, developing into being a top-class centre and rounding out his skills, that he can create in instances where it's not just his footwork and his ability to beat a defender and get in behind them, that he's actually got to make better decisions and be a better communicator to those inside him. Absolutely, that's part of it. And it's not just all the coaches, but the balance is somewhere in between, and both sides of it are really important. You know, speaking of the attack, Bernard mentioned the set-piece stuff last day against France. It just wasn't of the calibre for a game of that magnitude. There was no ingenuity behind it. There was nothing that suggested a brilliant kind of tactical ploy, and they really didn't make much of an impact there. I know the set piece didn't really get much, they didn't get much platform in the second half, but the first half examples were poor. So that's certainly on a coaching responsibility. So there's a bit of both to it, Gav, and the confidence thing is massive. Ireland haven't looked like a confident team for a long time, really. They don't look assured when they attack. I mean, the two French examples when they scored are brilliant. There was such an assured sense of confidence about it. And then beyond that, they used their kicking game really well. And they didn't really have to do a whole lot besides that. But there was real confidence and belief and clarity in what they were doing. And we definitely need to see more of that from an Irish point of view.
Just on that, Murray and Gav, I think in fairness, you look at someone like France, Like, they got a big win early. Their very first game in the Six Nations last year was against England at home. You know, Sean Edwards' defence shut down England. Now, England were poor, but they got a win, and I'm sure that secured helped, you know, belief in what they were trying to do. I don't think we've had a big win, like a win where, you know, we've beaten the teams we're expected to beat. You know, we've beaten Scotland, Wales, obviously back in last season. We've lost to England and France, and you can kind of write those off to a certain extent because, you know, they've got all the power and they've got more resource, whatever. So probably from a Farrell point of view, he probably hasn't had that big, significant win that gives the players the real belief in what they're doing, particularly if it's something that's different than Joe, which it obviously is. So that's something we need to feel sorry for, or, you know, sympathise to a certain extent. Now, whose fault is that? That's another argument. But I'm sure the confidence isn't as high as it probably is for playing for their provinces, where they know they can beat anybody on any given day.
Yeah.
When's the last time? Like, if you think back, what are we back all the way to 2018? Are we?
Yeah.
And even if you count in Leinster, they've been beaten by Saracens
Exactly.
in those two high-profile situations. And Munster haven't got past the semi-final.
No.
So yeah, I mean, just for Irish rugby in general,
Yeah,
it kind of needs that momentum.
Hang on. We could be working for an Italian version of the 42 today, and we talking about lack of confidence and lack of wins. So you know, those Italian players, they certainly would have a hang up about winning a top level game.
The 42.it, yeah, like, no, it's true enough as well, Bernard, about like a lack of a signature win that can be absolutely transformative for a team. I suppose, and we're probably blue in the face really in describing or discussing how we haven't actually really come that close to one either. Like 2 weeks ago against France, might be remembered in retrospect as a missed opportunity, but it didn't feel like an opportunity during the game, really, just in the way it played out. Like on the scoreboard, sure, and the last phases of play, like, yeah, you kind of have a chance, but you know, we went backwards ultimately. It didn't really feel like we ever got going there in like the 80-something minute. But then like you know, like, we can chat about Italy games, Scotland games, Wales games, and we've done it a good, like, over the course of 2 Six Nations now, and or is it 3? No, 2, and an Autumn Nations Cup. You need to beat England, say, at the end of this tournament, like, for there to be you'd imagine, for there to be like a proper, I don't know, sense of imbuement on the back of this tournament, because like ultimately this group of players know already they can beat Scotland. They know already they can beat Wales as well, even though they lost them this time around in sort of with a few mitigating circumstances. So like, it does feel as though you're nearly going around in circles a little bit, even if they show progress this weekend and it looks a lot smoother and they're more fluid in what they do, more coherent. The doubts will still be there when the England game rolls around, unless you eventually knock one of those teams off. It's a bit of a catch-22 really. No,
but yeah, it's a big issue that we maybe haven't addressed before, and you know, and I don't think psychologists can necessarily, you know, replicate that feeling you get from having beaten, you know, a top level team. Obviously, they can do work with players around you know, their mindset and anxiety and things like that. But I just think for this team, and even for Andy Farrell and Mike Catt, you know, it just helps settle them. You know what I mean? It'll help everybody just settle down. Like Paul has you know, it's been brilliant. He's gone in and straight away there's been an improvement, you know, but unfortunately, you know, in coaching that necessarily you don't always get the results very quickly. But having said that, we can't wait forever. So I just think it'd be great for Ireland to have a big finish to this tournament. But I do think if we don't kind of gel and get a lot out of Saturday, I think Scotland becomes a real potential banana skin then, and you just don't want that. You want to be able to have a really good, comfortable win against Italy, and then go to Scotland and you know, beat them, and then the season can be saved by a win against England. But I don't know. I think it's gonna be hard to see us beating Scotland if we struggle to beat Italy.
There are all sorts of connotations and, I don't know, permutations. I'd love a bit of comfort though, I agree. Like, just a comfortable win would be quite nice, wouldn't it, after the last few weeks? Murray, do you think we'll get a comfortable win?
I think it might be a little bit edgy. I
Jesus.
definitely need that win, but you think about the last time they went to Rome, in 2019, it was 26-16, and it certainly wasn't comfortable. It was a really tough afternoon, and Italy were ahead, and honestly, at one stage, you feared the worst. That was obviously a miserable year, and this is a different regime, etc. But Italy will certainly view this as a chance for them to cause a massive upset, that Ireland are vulnerable. They're not at peak confidence, as we've discussed. They haven't been fully firing. And they'll be really backing themselves to make a strong start. And in their project, with so many young guys across the squad now, that this is something for them to kickstart their project. Listen, I definitely expect Ireland to win. It will be, as we say, a massive, massive shock. I think they're 20-point or 21-point favourites. I'm not sure if they'll hit that margin quite, but it will be massively welcome if they do.
It's interesting, Bernard, isn't it? The fact that we're looking at this Italy game as a potential springboard or just something to get the confidence flowing again. Italy are looking at this Ireland fixture through the exact same prism.
Yeah, absolutely. And they'll feel, if you're Franco Smith, you'll say, look, we've played the best two teams in the competition. We've got experience. There's been elements, like, genuinely from an attacking point of view, Italy could pick more moments in the two games against England and France where they look dangerous, they look like they're implementing what they want to do, than we could, I think, in our games. So, look, the reality is, I think at the bottom, when push comes to shove, if there's 20 minutes left and the game is tight, they'll doubt their ability to close it out. But I think they're only looking for small wins at the moment, and they will definitely see an opportunity to probably bring this game closer. Ironically, it's usually later in the competition. Like, they usually start quite well in the tournament, and then obviously the defeats get to them a little bit and bruise their confidence. But I still think they'll see this as a really good opportunity for them to go out and continue to build on the momentum that they've built, even though it sounds hard. It sounds weird to say that, given they're being pumped in two games.
From a championship point of view, it would, like, obviously from an Irish point of view, everyone's going to want a massive hammering. But from a championship point of view, it would be positive to see them being competitive. And with this crop of young guys really starting to push forward. Obviously, Garbisi and Varney and the halfbacks, really young guys. You've got Lamaro there. Murray, even off the bench, he was excellent on that try they scored off scrum against England. A really nice bit of their attacking flourish, I suppose. And that's what we needed to see. We spoke about it before the championship. They haven't turned up enough over the last couple of years. It does look like Benetton have reacted to their bad situation pretty well and are getting a decent coaching team together there again. So that's what we want to see. We want to see Italy making those strides forward. And from their point of view, absolutely, it would be good for the championship if they could be really competitive in this game and give Ireland a massive fright.
Bernard, to wrap, gone be with the days where I could just ask you for a margin in an Italy versus Ireland game. Do we win, firstly? And if so, by how many, roughly?
I think we'll win by 30.
Oh, wow. That's superb. Not only do we have no rants, but we're finishing on a real high point here. I love it. Thanks a million, gents.
Cheers, Gav.
Thanks, Gav. See you guys.
Thanks a million to everybody at home as well for tuning in. Members.the42.ie if you want to join all of the good folks in the members WhatsApp group, and also if you want to subscribe to the extra podcasts that we have available throughout the Six Nations and also throughout the rugby season. So Murray and Owen Tulin, fantastic performance analyst, join forces every Monday morning to look back on the weekend's action in forensic detail. We also have post-match immediate reaction pods as well after Ireland games in the Six Nations. A reminder, if you could at all, to rate the podcast and even leave a review if you were feeling particularly generous with your time. It helps us out an awful lot, and I'm always kind of a little bit blown away by the nice things that people say when they do it, despite the fact that at one point there was calls for my removal as host, which I'll never forget. Thank you again to everybody. Enjoyed the rugby over the weekend, both provincial and international. We'll catch you in the post-match if you're a member, and also on Monday. And for non-members, we'll catch you back in this regular Thursday slot next week. Until then, mind yourselves. Take it easy.